The setting was serene. Meghan Markle was said to be glowing in white. The rose garden was trimmed. Cameras clicked. The Sussex family posed by the flowered archway, their daughter Lilibet Diana apparently cradled in Meghan's arms. The image was elegant, polished, and powerful. It was a statement to the world. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were doing things their own way, even when it came to royal rituals like christenings. And yet, behind the lenses and floral backdrops, something was missing. Not long after the images made their rounds on social media, whispers began to surface. Whispers from stylists who weren't allowed to touch the baby. From assistants who couldn't remember seeing a real child on set. From neighbors who claimed they hadn't seen children at the Montecito mansion in months. The official press release from the Sussex camp had been careful. No exact location. No footage. No visible priest. No press access. No known guest list. And above all, no independent confirmation that Lilibet Diana was ever physically present. Then came the bombshell that rattled royal watchers and media outlets across the globe. Tyler Perry, once a trusted friend and godfather figure to the Sussexes, allegedly made a quiet but startling admission in private circles. According to insiders, he had directly warned King Charles himself. There were no children at the Montecito mansion, and Lilibet was never physically present at the christening. The event, Perry reportedly confessed, was staged for photographs. Worse still, he claimed that what was cradled in Meghan's arms that day may not have been a child at all. It may have been a doll. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This revelation, if true, changes everything. In a world where celebrity appearances are managed down to the strand of hair, even minor inconsistencies can ignite a storm of speculation. But this wasn't just about a staged moment or a PR mishap. This was about the royal line of succession, international press credibility, and the quiet unraveling of a carefully woven narrative. The image of Lilibet Diana, bathed in sunlight and draped in a hand-embroidered christening gown, was supposed to be a moment of redemption. It was a visual counterpoint to the bitterness that had marred Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's departure from royal duties. It was supposed to silence the critics, humanize the couple, and underscore their desire for privacy and dignity away from the prying eyes of the British media. But now, under a microscope, the moment itself has begun to disintegrate. Tyler Perry's involvement adds another layer of intrigue. A billionaire mogul with connections across Hollywood and political circles, Perry offered his Los Angeles estate to Harry and Meghan during their transition away from royal life. He was hailed as a lifeline, a compassionate figure who shielded the couple from the press while offering them a space to regroup. That he would now be the source of such a damning revelation is, in a word, shocking. It's not clear when Perry began to doubt the authenticity of what was unfolding before him. Some sources say he grew uncomfortable when protocols around the christening didn't align with what he'd experienced before. Others claim he never laid eyes on Lilibet in the days leading up to or following the christening. There were allegedly discussions about photo setups, lighting requirements, and even hush-hush briefings that warned staff not to touch or approach the child. It was all too clinical, too rehearsed. According to royal insiders, when Perry quietly approached King Charles with his concerns, he did so not out of malice, but out of loyalty to the truth. He felt something had gone too far, that a charade was being maintained not just for the sake of privacy, but for manipulation. The idea that a christening, a deeply spiritual and culturally significant ceremony, could be fabricated, stunned even the most hardened skeptics at the palace. King Charles, for his part, reportedly received the information with a mixture of disbelief and fury. The christening of a royal great-grandchild, even one born outside the bounds of Buckingham Palace, held significance beyond its immediate circle. It implied legitimacy. It placed Lilibet Diana in line for potential royal titles and honors. It connected her to a lineage that the palace has worked hard to preserve. If Perry's claims were true, then the integrity of that ceremony and the implications that flowed from it were built on sand. Palace officials began quietly reviewing press releases. Aides cross-checked internal communications. Curiously, not a single British cleric confirmed their involvement in the alleged christening. No church names were published. No sacraments were documented. Nothing was filed with any Anglican diocese. Even seasoned royal correspondents began raising questions. And for the first time since their exodus, the Sussexes were facing a crisis not of perception, but of credibility. Public reaction was divided. Some defended the couple, citing their long-standing grievances with the press and royal family. Others were more skeptical. How could a child be baptized in secret with no credible third-party verification? Why were there no videos, no behind-the-scenes glimpses, no testimonials from friends or family who attended? And if Tyler Perry was truly Lilibet's godfather, why would he turn against them so dramatically, unless something deeply disturbing had occurred? Social media exploded with theories. Users began comparing Lilibet's supposed appearance in photos to known lifelike dolls. Hashtags like #Dollgate and #WhereIsLilibet began trending. TikTok detectives zoomed in on fingers, fabric creases, and lighting discrepancies. One popular video claimed the child's head never moved between two separate frames. Another pointed out that the sunlight didn't reflect naturally across the infant's face. It was the kind of amateur sleuthing usually reserved for celebrity conspiracy theories, but this time, it had the added weight of royal scandal. In Montecito, sources close to the Sussexes say Meghan went into damage control. Communications with Netflix were allegedly ramped up. Legal teams were consulted. Crisis PR firms were briefed. Meghan, according to one insider, was shaking and livid, accusing Perry of betrayal. Others say Harry was caught in the middle, torn between defending his wife and confronting a friend who, until now, had stood by them through thick and thin. This story is more than just a media controversy. It's a window into the larger questions that continue to haunt the Sussex saga. What is real and what is manufactured? How far will image building go in an era of curated content, staged moments, and digital storytelling? And when authenticity clashes with control, who ends up paying the price? As we dive deeper into the chapters that follow, we'll dissect the timeline of events leading to the so-called christening. We'll explore the gaps in the official narrative, the rise and fall of Tyler Perry's involvement, and the reaction inside the royal family. We'll examine the growing online investigation, the doll theory, and the mounting pressure on Harry and Meghan to produce proof of Lilibet's public life. And we'll ask the question many are now afraid to voice out loud. Was the child we saw in that photo ever truly there? If you thought the royal drama ended with Megxit, you may want to buckle in. Because what's unfolding now is something far more unnerving. It's not just about family divisions or media feuds. It's about the very existence of a royal heir, and whether the world has been shown a fabrication from the start. The air in Montecito always carries a particular stillness, a kind of rich silence money can buy. Nestled along the Californian coast, the Sussexes' estate had become a symbol of their independence, their carefully curated privacy, and their post-royal reinvention. From the manicured rose bushes to the imported European olive trees, the residence served not just as a home, but as a fortress, guarding their narrative, shielding their children, and deterring intruders, both physical and digital. But what if the fortress didn't just guard the truth, it concealed a void? For months, questions about the visibility of Harry and Meghan's children had lingered in the tabloids and online forums. Archie had been seen sparingly, an occasional glimpse in a Netflix documentary, a birthday video, a silhouette here or there. But Lilibet Diana, the child named in tribute to Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana, remained almost entirely hidden from public view. There were no paparazzi photos, no accidental sightings, not even reports from locals who might have spotted the family at a beach or brunch spot. And then came the whispers. There were no children living at all in the Sussex mansion. It was an audacious claim. At first, it seemed like the kind of gossip tailor-made for royal conspiracies. But as more voices, some anonymous, some daring, began to echo the same concerns, the claim began to take on a life of its own. Among the first to stoke curiosity were security contractors who had once worked near the Sussex estate. One claimed he never had to adjust security protocols for infant or toddler movement. Another said there were no toys, no stroller tracks in the driveway, no cries or laughter heard from inside the palatial walls. It was, in their words, eerily adult. A neighbor, whose property borders the Sussex estate by a thin stretch of hedge and iron fencing, recalled something even more unsettling. "I've seen staff walking the dogs regularly," she said in a private message to a former tabloid editor. "But I've never, not once, seen a child being carried, walked, or playing outside. We're talking about years now, not weeks. Then came a set of drone images, legally obtained and carefully blurred to avoid privacy infractions. These images, analyzed frame by online enthusiasts, showed the estate's gardens, terrace, and pool area, all pristine, untouched, and adult-centric. No paddling pools, no swing sets, no toddler slides. For a couple with 2 children under 5, it was an unusual setup. The images reignited debates. Were the children being raised with absolute indoor privacy, or were they somewhere else? The mystery deepened when staff turnover at the Montecito mansion was quietly reported in employment blogs and insider forums. One former housekeeper, hired for a short-term contract, shared anonymously that while she had access to the east and west wings of the estate, she never encountered any nursery. She said the baby monitor station in the kitchen was always turned off, and that the supposed children's wing was perpetually locked, something she claimed she had never seen in high-profile celebrity homes before. Adding to the confusion was the family's rarely updated social presence. Despite operating under the umbrella of the Archwell Foundation and controlling a production company and public brand, Meghan and Harry consistently refrained from posting anything candid about their children. Not even birthday party scenes or arts and crafts sessions. Everything was scripted, measured, and suspiciously static. It was this carefully restricted content strategy that left even seasoned PR analysts puzzled. One expert remarked, "For a couple that complains of media manipulation, they exert an astonishing level of message control." Then came the moment that shattered the delicate balance between privacy and public trust. A high-profile guest, reportedly invited for a private meeting at the Sussex estate in early spring, claimed they saw no evidence of children living there. The source, who remains unnamed but has been verified by 2 separate journalists as a legitimate contact, said the house was eerily silent. She described dining in the sunroom, chatting with Meghan about motherhood and creative projects. But when asked about toys or childproofing, Meghan allegedly deflected and changed the subject. The guest later confided, "It just didn't feel like a home where young kids lived." Perhaps the most damning detail came from an estate management agency that works with high-net-worth individuals in California. Though they did not name the Sussexes directly, a property manager in a podcast interview described a celebrity couple who had refused to allow any third-party nannies, childcare staff, or service vendors near a certain wing of the property, and that no diaper deliveries, pediatrician visits, or child-related service logs had ever been registered for that household. Royal watchers quickly matched the timeline, location, and details to the Sussex property. And yet, the illusion persisted. The photographs were polished. The press releases were articulate. The royal titles continued. The world was told there were 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, growing up happily in a sun-drenched California paradise. And most media outlets took it at face value. But behind the scenes, questions piled up. Where were the school enrollment records? Where were the local pediatrician sightings? Where were the nannies, the playdates, the park outings? In Montecito, a neighborhood known for its insatiable appetite for gossip, camera flashes, and celebrity stories, how was it that not a single concrete image or moment involving Lilibet had ever surfaced beyond stage photography? It was in this climate of doubt that Tyler Perry reportedly took his concern to higher ground. According to a source close to the royal household, Perry reached out through an intermediary, requesting a discreet audience with King Charles. The meeting was not formal. It was not part of any public schedule, but it was urgent. Perry, the source said, had grown uncomfortable. He had begun to piece together a story that didn't add up. He allegedly shared that during a visit to his estate, where the christening was reportedly held, no children were present. The photographers were briefed. The lighting was preset. But Meghan and Harry were the only ones he saw preparing for the shoot. When he inquired about Lilibet, Perry was told she was resting and would be brought out once everything was ready. But she never was. In her place, something was handed off. A swaddled bundle that no one but Meghan touched. The photographer, Perry claimed, kept a wide frame, never zooming in. No videos. No movement. Just stills. As the shoot wrapped, Perry said he felt uneasy. He expected to meet his goddaughter, to see her face, to hold her. But the moment never came. Instead, the Sussexes thanked him, handed him a commemorative box of photos from the shoot, and left. Harry reportedly asked an assistant afterward if the child had left early, only to be met with a shrug and silence. This story, if verified, is beyond damning. It turns the illusion of the California family home into something far more disconcerting. A stage set. A canvas. A castle built of smoke and mirrors. It also begs a deeper, more uncomfortable question. If there were no children there, then where are they now? As speculation mounts, the pressure is not only on Meghan and Harry, but also on King Charles himself. The monarchy must now grapple with potential implications on succession, legitimacy, and public perception. A christening that was meant to unite families and bridge broken bonds has instead opened a wound that may never heal. The illusion of the California home, private, secure, and filled with the laughter of children, has cracked. And as we move forward into the next chapter, we confront an even stranger truth. If the christening photos were staged and Lilibet was not truly there, what exactly did the world witness that day? The glint of truth doesn't always emerge with a bang. Sometimes, it slips through a crack in the facade. A soft murmur in a crowded room, a sideways glance during an otherwise calm conversation, or in this case, a confession from a man who had once vowed to protect the very people now at the center of the storm. Tyler Perry, the Hollywood magnate, philanthropist, and godfather to Lilibet Diana, had for years been considered a solid and unwavering ally to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. But even the most loyal friends can reach a breaking point. For a long time, Harry had kept his mouth shut. He had seen the backlash they endured, the British tabloids' unrelenting attacks, the accusations of attention-seeking, the skepticism about their mental health and marriages. He offered sanctuary when they had nowhere to turn, providing them with the keys to his Beverly Hills estate at a time when the world watched every movement they made. His loyalty wasn't just practical, it was deeply personal. As a black man who had fought his way through poverty and discrimination to become one of Hollywood's most powerful figures, Perry had empathized with Meghan's struggles inside a system he believed had rejected her. But that empathy began to crack the day he stood at the edge of his garden, waiting to meet the child he had agreed to become a spiritual guide for, and walked away with nothing but photographs and doubt. It started with a request. Perry was asked to allow his estate to be used for Lilibet Diana's christening. The request was low-key, supposedly meant to keep the event private and away from prying media. According to sources, Perry didn't hesitate. He agreed to open his doors once again, trusting that his role as godfather was both symbolic and sacred. What he expected was a spiritual gathering, however small. What he got, instead, was a meticulously controlled photo opportunity. He noticed the first red flag when the setup crew arrived. Most of them were not local. The florists had flown in from Canada. The photographer was British but had no known association with the royal family's usual circle. Lighting technicians began assembling large panels of white reflectors, a move Perry found odd for what was supposed to be a daylight christening. Then came the NDAs, non-disclosure agreements that every crew member had to sign, even those who had worked with Perry for years. The language was severe. Not a word about what you see, hear, or suspect can ever leave this property. Perry didn't question it aloud. He had worked with celebrities long enough to know that paranoia and secrecy often walk hand in hand with fame. But something felt off. He wasn't given a guest list. He didn't know if a priest had been confirmed. When he asked about clergy, he was told vaguely that a spiritual leader had been consulted and would appear when the time was right. The phrase struck him as theatrical, too vague to be comforting. The morning of the christening, Perry walked the perimeter of his property. He was dressed in a simple black suit. A small Bible rested in his jacket pocket. He had prepared a personal prayer for the moment he would meet Lilibet, his goddaughter, a child he believed he had been chosen to guide. He expected to see joyful chaos, crying babies, nervous parents, scented oils, silver bowls. But the scene was eerily calm. No laughter, no baby noises, just the hum of cameras being calibrated. When Harry and Meghan arrived, they were poised, calm, camera-ready. Meghan wore a pale beige dress and heels that Perry later thought were impractical for a mother holding an infant. Harry smiled, joked with the photographer, and adjusted his cufflinks several times. But Perry was still waiting to see Lilibet. Then came the moment. A woman in dark sunglasses and a headset whispered something into Meghan's ear. Meghan nodded, turned toward a covered stroller, and retrieved a tightly wrapped bundle. It was silent, too silent. Harry watched as Meghan cradled the bundle in her arms, shifting its weight as though it were a newborn. But something wasn't right. The body didn't move. It didn't squirm or reach. Its head remained at the same tilt no matter how she adjusted her arms. Harry's heart sank. He waited. He assumed the bundle would be revealed, if only briefly, during the christening itself. But the moment never came. The photographer began clicking. Harry stood beside Meghan, his hand on her back. The spiritual leader never arrived. At some point, a crew member gently lowered a small glass of water onto a pedestal nearby. It was poured, lightly, over the top of the bundle. Harry realized it was for the photos. There was no real ceremony, just a mimicry of one. Later, he approached Meghan quietly and asked, "Will I get a chance to hold her?" She hesitated, smiled, then said, "She's a little fussy today. Probably best to let her nap." It was a clean deflection, but it chilled Harry. In that moment, he realized he was not just witnessing a private family moment. He was part of something performative, something possibly fabricated. After the shoot, Harry and Meghan thanked him profusely. They handed him a velvet envelope with a set of printed photographs and a card that read, "Thank you for being Lily's guiding light." The gesture felt hollow. Harry smiled, nodded, and went back inside. But his hands trembled when he looked again at the photos. Each one felt more staged than the last. Harry didn't talk about it for weeks. He considered letting it go. After all, it wasn't his child. It wasn't his family. But the gnawing feeling didn't leave him. One night, while speaking with a longtime friend from the philanthropic world, he finally let it slip. "I'm worried something isn't right," he said. "I didn't see a child. I didn't hear a child. But they had a ceremony anyway. What does that say?" The friend urged him to come forward. Not to the press, but to someone who had a stake in the truth. That's when Perry made the quiet decision to approach the royal family. Through discreet channels, Perry's concerns were relayed to a senior aide close to King Charles. What followed was a series of encrypted messages, a virtual meeting, and eventually, a hushed visit to London under the guise of business. There, behind the walls of Clarence House, Perry sat down with a royal confidant and shared everything he remembered. The bundling, the silence, the rigid head, the lack of clergy, the fake pour of water, the evasiveness, and his deep, gnawing feeling that the child everyone had spoken about had never been there. The report made its way up the chain. King Charles, known for his restraint, reportedly responded with one phrase: "This cannot be ignored." The confession had now become a catalyst. It triggered the reopening of private royal archives, internal reviews of titles granted, and re-examinations of official family documents. The palace, still reeling from years of Sussex-led criticism, could not afford to be caught complicit in a deception involving the royal line. Perry, for his part, receded from public view after the confession. He canceled 2 press appearances. He rescheduled a charity gala. His legal team began preparing for the possibility of a backlash. He knew that the moment this story got out, if it got out, he would be painted as a traitor. But he was no longer interested in protecting anyone's image. As he reportedly told his assistant, "This isn't about them anymore. This is about the truth. And if I'm wrong, let them show me." As the media began to circle, Tyler Perry's name became a lightning rod. Was he seeking attention? Was he hurt by some private falling out? Or was he, as his defenders claimed, the only person in the inner circle brave enough to speak the truth? What cannot be denied is this: Perry's confession was the moment the foundation began to crack. It gave weight to what had, until then, been rumor and speculation. It reframed the christening not as a sacred family moment, but as a calculated performance. It forced the public, and the monarchy, to consider the unthinkable, that a child's identity, presence, and even existence may have been manipulated for a narrative. It is one thing for critics to speculate online. It is another for a man like Tyler Perry, a billionaire, filmmaker, and global philanthropist, to risk his reputation on a claim this serious. But Perry didn't back down. He had seen too much. He had stayed silent too long. And now, the illusion that had been built around a swaddled bundle in his backyard was beginning to unravel. The announcement was subtle, almost too subtle for a royal occasion. A single statement released to a select few press outlets confirmed it. Lilibet Diana, daughter of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, had been christened in a private ceremony in California. There were no royal bulletins, no formal palace acknowledgement, no fanfare. It stood in sharp contrast to the tradition-bound spectacle usually associated with royal christenings, where the public might not attend, but the symbolism of lineage and faith was always on full display. This one, it vanished into thin air almost as quickly as it had arrived. There was no official date listed, no church named, no clergyman credited, no photos from the ceremony, only the now infamous post-christening image of Meghan and Harry holding their daughter in what looked more like a lifestyle magazine shoot than a sacrament. To royal watchers and religious traditionalists alike, the absence of verifiable details wasn't just suspicious. It was jarring. Royal christenings are not mere rituals. They are events of national and historical importance. Since Queen Victoria's era, the British royal family has treated the christening of each child as a moment of continuity, cementing their place in both the Church of England and the royal bloodline. The gowns, the holy water from the River Jordan, the carefully curated guest lists, all of it symbolized heritage and identity. Even in private settings, the family ensured that records were kept and formalities observed. That's what made the Lilibet announcement so puzzling. It offered none of that. Instead, what the public got was an exercise in ambiguity. The press release was worded in a way that left just enough room for doubt. It said Lilibet was christened at home in an intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family. It named no officiant. It did not say whether she was baptized under the Church of England or any denomination at all. The message was not confirmed by Lambeth Palace, the seat of the Archbishop of Canterbury. In fact, the Archbishop's office, when contacted by several major British outlets, declined to comment altogether. And that silence was deafening. Adding fuel to the speculation, the palace refused to release any names from the guest list. If senior royals had attended, tradition dictated that their presence would be acknowledged. But sources close to Buckingham Palace later revealed that no royal family members, neither King Charles, Queen Camilla, nor even Princess Eugenie or Zara Tindall, were present at the event. Prince William and Catherine were reportedly not invited, nor was Princess Anne. This revelation stunned even neutral observers. A christening without a single senior royal? Unheard of. If the royal family wasn't there, who was? The only confirmed attendees were Tyler Perry, allegedly the godfather, and a handful of Meghan's California-based associates. But even their identities weren't confirmed by name. The vagueness was not just confusing, it bordered on provocative. For an event rooted in transparency, accountability, and lineage, this cloak of secrecy suggested that something was amiss. Then came the questions about the venue. Meghan and Harry's Montecito estate was named as the location, but no footage, images, or statements from officiating clergy emerged. No photos of the ceremony itself were ever released, despite the Sussexes having full control over their image production. This omission stood in stark contrast to previous royal christenings, those of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and even Archie, which were accompanied by formal portraits, royal acknowledgments, and church bulletins. Even Archie's own christening in 2019, though held privately at Windsor Castle, featured a clearly documented guest list, statements from Buckingham Palace, and an official portrait that included Prince Charles, Camilla, Prince William, and Catherine. That ceremony also featured the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose participation was widely confirmed. With Lilibet, none of this was the case. Curiously, no local religious authorities in California could verify having officiated the baptism. Reporters reached out to various Anglican and Episcopal dioceses across Southern California. Not a single bishop or priest came forward. One church, located near Santa Barbara, stated that they had been asked not to comment on events concerning private citizens. Another, when contacted by a British journalist, claimed they had no record of any such christening. It was this vacuum of verification that began to erode the Sussexes' narrative. If the event had truly happened, why the extreme secrecy? Why the absence of clergy, family, documentation, or even a vague spiritual acknowledgement? And why were media outlets that asked follow-up questions suddenly being stonewalled? A more cynical theory soon emerged. The christening wasn't just private, it was staged. This idea gained traction not from conspiracy theorists, but from seasoned journalists who had covered the royal beat for decades. One reporter who had covered Prince William's wedding and all three of his children's christenings remarked, "We've never seen anything this opaque before. Privacy is one thing. This feels like erasure." Some royal watchers pointed out inconsistencies in the timeline. The Sussexes had claimed that the christening took place in early March, but Tyler Perry was photographed on location at his film set in Atlanta the day before and after the supposed event. His travel records, pulled from private aviation databases, showed no flights to Santa Barbara or Montecito in that week. If he was the godfather, how had he attended the ceremony? Others began scrutinizing the now infamous christening photograph. The image, shared with select outlets, showed Harry, Meghan, and what appeared to be baby Lilibet in the garden, surrounded by white roses. But digital photography experts began analyzing the shadows, angles, and sharpness of the image. Some noticed that the baby's facial features lacked the depth usually seen in a live child's photo. Her eyes appeared shut, lips unmoving, and body posture unnaturally rigid. Speculation intensified. Was this a doll? Multiple image analysts weighed in. One photographer claimed the baby in the photo exhibited no signs of muscle tension or subtle infant movement, features nearly impossible to replicate with props. Another suggested the image had been heavily edited, with lighting and saturation levels inconsistent with the rest of the subjects. The theory that a prop or doll had been used was no longer confined to Reddit threads. It had entered mainstream conversation. The christening that wasn't began to overshadow everything else. Tyler Perry, meanwhile, refused to confirm or deny his attendance. When asked by a journalist at a red carpet event about his role in the ceremony, he replied only, "I support them both. That's all I'll say." For someone once so vocal about his bond with the Sussexes, the sudden reticence was deafening. The British royal family remained characteristically silent. When King Charles was asked during a public walkabout whether he had attended Lilibet's christening, he smiled politely and said nothing. Insiders claimed that the palace was conducting quiet inquiries into the matter, not because they doubted the child's existence, but because they could not verify the ceremony had ever taken place as presented. That lack of verification carries more weight than most realize. In royal tradition, christenings are more than religious milestones. They are symbolic entries into the lineage and institutional framework of the monarchy. A child who is christened by a recognized clergyman of the Church of England holds an undisputed place within the royal hierarchy. A child who is not, who cannot be verified, becomes a question mark, a dangling thread in a carefully woven tapestry. That's not just a matter of PR, it's a matter of protocol. What's more, Lilibet's royal title, Princess of Sussex, only holds significance if her identity, lineage, and religious status are properly documented. If the christening was staged, or worse, if the child wasn't truly present, the implications are profound. It would call into question not only her right to the title, but also the honesty of the narrative her parents have built. As this chapter of the Sussex saga unfolds, it's clear that the supposed christening has become a pivot point, a moment when the veil may have been lifted, even if momentarily. Whether intentional or not, the event has become emblematic of the broader mystery surrounding Lilibet Diana's place in royal history. The christening that may yet become one of the defining controversies of modern royal life. And as investigators, journalists, and royal observers continue to dig deeper, one truth remains chillingly elusive. If that ceremony was staged, then what does that say about everything else? When the photos of Lilibet Diana's christening surfaced, they were presented as soft, heartwarming proof of a deeply private, yet sacred family moment. Meghan cradled her daughter in what appeared to be a sun-dappled garden. Prince Harry stood beside her, his expression peaceful, almost proud. White roses framed the background, matching the pastel hues of Meghan's dress. Everything about the image was curated, styled, and serene. But for those who examined it closely, journalists, digital analysts, and former royal aides, one critical question remained unanswered. Who actually took the photos? Unlike traditional royal christening portraits, which include clear information about the photographer, the setting, and often an official watermark or credit, these images came with no such details. No named photographer, no location tag, no formal statement of authorship. This was highly unusual for a family that had previously released professional portraits of Archie, Lilibet, and themselves, typically credited to well-known photographers such as Meghan Harry or Matt Sales. For a christening of this magnitude, the absence of a photographer's name struck many as a glaring omission. Some initial reports speculated that the Sussexes had tapped a local Montecito photographer for the shoot, someone trusted, discreet, and off the radar. But no one came forward. Not a single local studio or freelancer claimed involvement. In an industry where name recognition is gold, this silence was both bizarre and suspect. Photographers, especially those with A-list clients, typically leverage even a small association with celebrity events for professional clout. To remain anonymous entirely, especially after images were published in national media, was unheard of. What followed was an intense digital manhunt. Online communities of amateur analysts began dissecting the images. They zoomed in on reflections in glass vases and picture frames. They examined light direction, lens distortion, and depth of field. Several analysts came to the same conclusion. The photos had likely been taken with a high-end DSLR camera fitted with a fixed focal lens, consistent with commercial-grade studio equipment. Not something you'd use for a casual backyard photo. The lighting was too perfect. The shadows were expertly diffused. The framing suggested pre-planned blocking, as if every person knew where to stand for the best symmetry. But this begged another question. Why hire such a professional setup for a supposedly spontaneous, intimate christening, and then never credit the artist responsible? One theory that emerged pointed toward stage production. If the entire event had been orchestrated not for ceremony, but for imagery, then the photographer wasn't a guest at all. He or she was a technician, a contractor hired for a specific purpose, then bound by non-disclosure agreements. Multiple media insiders claimed that the Sussexes' inner circle, particularly Meghan's publicity team, often operated with NDAs so strict they bordered on litigious. It would not be unheard of for a photographer to sign a full gag order in exchange for a one-day gig and a hefty paycheck. But the silence extended beyond professional discretion. It was as if the photographer didn't exist. Then came a shocking twist. One of the metadata experts who analyzed the publicly available image discovered that the photo's EXIF data, the embedded code that stores digital photograph details such as date, time, camera model, and even GPS coordinates, had been completely scrubbed. This in itself wasn't unusual. Many celebrities remove metadata to preserve privacy. But in this case, it was done with such sophistication that even the scrubbed traces were clean. A forensic-level wipe. No digital fingerprint. That, experts say, requires not just awareness, but intention. One particularly disturbing element that arose during this analysis was the nature of shadows and light patterns in the photo. The light hitting Meghan and Harry was soft, warm, and appeared to be natural golden hour light. However, the shadows behind them, particularly around Lilibet's swaddled form, did not correspond to the direction of the sun. In fact, multiple angles seemed to conflict, suggesting the use of reflectors or artificial studio lighting. For a casual garden christening, the photographic setup seemed overproduced, even synthetic. Another theory surfaced that the image might have been composited, an editing technique where multiple images are merged into a single, seamless frame. This could explain the unnatural lighting and stiffness of certain elements in the photo. A composite image can be made to look natural, but under close examination, discrepancies emerge. Mismatched shadows, different resolutions in facial features, strange outlines around limbs. One graphics analyst claimed that Meghan's hand around the baby showed slight signs of artifacting, typically caused when one image layer is adjusted too aggressively. Others noted that Lilibet's face appeared unusually smooth, almost waxen. Still, no direct evidence surfaced to prove the photo was fake. But the inconsistencies, when compiled, painted a troubling picture. Either the Sussexes had gone to extreme lengths to keep the photographer secret for privacy reasons, or the photo was not taken under the circumstances the public had been led to believe. To understand how strange this was, one need only look at how previous royal christenings were documented. For example, Prince George's christening photo was taken by Jason Bell, an acclaimed portrait photographer. His name was released with the image. He was interviewed about the experience. Princess Charlotte's and Prince Louis's christenings followed the same pattern. Even Archie's, though more private, was photographed by Chris Allerton, a name publicly shared and professionally endorsed. These weren't just pictures, they were historical documents, official records in a visual lineage. In contrast, Lilibet's christening photos felt more like product branding, polished, warm, and nonspecific. Critics argued that the image didn't serve a ceremonial purpose at all, but instead functioned as a PR tool. The photo wasn't a window into a family event. It was a statement. We did this. We were there. Now move on. But if that was the case, then why avoid the usual hallmarks of authenticity? Some speculated that the photo was staged after the fact, that a day or even a week after the christening, the Sussexes recreated the scene in their garden and called in a private photographer to capture the moment for public consumption. If true, it would mean that the photograph was not from the actual ceremony at all, but from a reenactment, a visual placeholder. If the purpose was to maintain the illusion of a traditional christening without actually involving the logistical and ceremonial requirements of one, then such a photo would have served its purpose. It would be seen by the media, reported on by royal correspondents, and most importantly, cemented into the digital archives as proof that the child was christened, even if the physical event lacked the necessary validation. The mystery deepened when an anonymous whistleblower, allegedly a former assistant working briefly with the Sussex PR team, reached out to a European media outlet. The assistant claimed that on the day of the christening photo shoot, there were rehearsals held at the estate. Lighting tests were conducted, stand-ins were used to frame the shot, and multiple versions of the image were taken. According to the source, Lilibet was not present at any of these sessions. Instead, the baby figure was always wrapped in swaddling, handled only by Meghan, and kept mostly stationary. The assistant's claim could not be verified independently. Yet, when paired with the unusual secrecy surrounding the photographer and the absence of clergy, the idea that the image had been staged post-event became increasingly difficult to ignore. If anything, the silence itself became an indictment. A photo that should have been joyful confirmation instead raised more questions than it answered. Eventually, the photographer mystery became so controversial that media watchdogs began asking broader questions. Should images like these be considered historical evidence? Do celebrity-controlled narratives, when attached to matters of succession and royal identity, deserve more scrutiny than they receive? And if images are all we're given, are we entitled to know how they were made? In the case of Lilibet's christening, we still don't know who took the photo. We don't know when or where it was taken. We don't know whether the child in the image was real or a stand-in, or whether the image was composited from separate elements. What we do know is that no one, from the Sussexes media team to their public defenders, has come forward with answers. And perhaps that's the most telling clue of all. Every royal event, no matter how private, carries with it a trail of logistics that few ever see. Security details, vetted transportation, background checks on guests, and the coordination of multiple agencies all form an invisible infrastructure designed to protect the royal name and ensure the smooth execution of high-profile occasions. While the public sees the polished images and smiling faces, behind the scenes is a machine of meticulous organization. For the christening of Lilibet Diana, a ceremony allegedly held under the protective umbrella of a private estate in California, that machine was expected to be in full force. But according to one royal security contractor who has since stepped forward, what should have been routine turned out to be highly irregular. The man, whose identity remains protected due to the sensitivity of his former position, worked closely with both British and American teams tasked with coordinating security operations for events involving royal family members abroad. Though technically no longer employed by the Crown, he continued as an independent contractor for high-profile individuals with ties to the monarchy. When Harry and Meghan transitioned to private life in California, select personnel were retained under private contracts to maintain a continuity of royal standard protocols. This whistleblower, as he would later be known in media reports, was one of them. His statement began like any other post-event debrief, an assessment of potential security flaws, unusual behavior, and procedural feedback. But within that document were several red flags that, when pieced together, raised deeply troubling questions about what really took place the day of the christening. He was stationed at the Montecito estate in the days leading up to the event, and during that time, he observed what he described as a suspicious absence of child-specific movement. Typically, when a child is expected to attend or be the centerpiece of a family event, particularly one with religious significance, security is adjusted accordingly. Children require special exits, stroller access, indoor protection in case of weather changes, and even temperature-controlled environments depending on their age. In this case, none of that was arranged. According to the whistleblower, it was as if no one was preparing for a baby at all. He noticed something else that unsettled him. During walkthroughs and mock security drills with Harry and Meghan's personal staff, none of the dry runs involved a child. The placeholder used during route simulations was a white bag of towels, loosely bundled to simulate the dimensions of a newborn. At first, the man thought it was simply a stand-in to avoid disturbing Lilibet's schedule. But when the same method was used during the final rehearsal hours before the christening shoot, alarm bells went off. Moreover, no emergency pediatric contacts were logged. Typically, for an event involving a royal child, security teams maintain a list of nearby hospitals, on-call pediatricians, and medical first responders. In this case, the team's medic, a contractor from Los Angeles, was never given such contacts. "We weren't told to prepare for any infant care situations," the whistleblower noted. "That's unheard of in my line of work." Even the transportation schedule raised eyebrows. No child safety car seats were fitted into the assigned vehicles. When he asked if the baby would be arriving separately, he was told, "No need. She's already here." But no one had seen her enter the property, and no records existed of any prior secured entry carrying a child. The day of the christening, the whistleblower was assigned to perimeter duty. His station had direct visual access to the east entrance and limited line of sight to the rear courtyard, where the photos would later be taken. What he saw, or rather didn't see, would haunt him. There were no sounds, no signs of a child, he explained. Usually, you hear something, crying, laughter, the coo of a baby. Nothing. For a place supposedly hosting a child's christening, it was chillingly silent. When the time for the photos came, he remained at his post, watching through discreet surveillance screens as Harry and Meghan emerged from the house. Meghan held what appeared to be a swaddled infant in her arms. The object never moved. Its posture never shifted. At no point did it lift its head or exhibit any of the subtle, involuntary motions typical of an infant. "I've done security for hundreds of events involving children," the man said. "And every single time, no matter how still the baby is, you can tell it's alive. Breathing, blinking, fidgeting. That thing didn't twitch once." In the hours that followed, the whistleblower quietly asked colleagues if they had seen Lilibet at any point during the day. None had. The kitchen staff reported no high-chair usage. No baby bottles were found. No child-specific waste was generated. There was no baby monitor frequency active, no visible toys, and none of the usual signs of a recently used nursery room. The man wasn't the only one concerned. One of the private drivers reportedly asked where the car seat was supposed to be stored, only to be told, "It's not necessary." Another staff member commented that the supposed guest list didn't include any children or extended family, not even Doria Ragland, Meghan's mother. That, for a christening, was unusually sparse. But it was what happened after the event that fully cemented the whistleblower's unease. As part of standard protocol, all security footage from the estate was supposed to be reviewed and archived by the team. However, when he returned to retrieve copies of the video files for secure backup, he was told the internal surveillance had been deactivated for the day for privacy. That decision, he claimed, came directly from Meghan's head of household operations. "I've never had a client request that in my entire career," he said. "It violates basic safety expectations. If something had gone wrong, a medical emergency, a fire, an intruder, we would have had no visual record." When he pushed back on the missing footage, he was stonewalled. Hours later, he received a direct call from a legal representative affiliated with the Sussexes, reminding him of his confidentiality obligations. The message was not veiled. It was a warning. What troubled him most, he later revealed, was not the lack of a child's presence. It was the systematic effort to erase any trail that might confirm or deny that presence. "It was like working a security job inside a theater," he said. "Everything felt staged. Everyone acted their part. But no one believed the story." Eventually, his unease led him to resign from further assignments related to the Sussex household. He declined a contract renewal, citing ethical concerns. He didn't go public immediately, fearful of legal consequences, professional blacklisting, and reputational harm. But after the photos were released and Tyler Perry's alleged confession began circulating in closed circles, he realized he wasn't alone. The cracks in the christening narrative weren't just media-generated. They were being exposed from within. The whistleblower's statement was shared confidentially with a senior investigative reporter who had covered the British royal family for over 20 years. Upon review, the reporter described the security debrief as the most credible internal confirmation we've seen so far that the christening event may not have been what it appeared to be. Combined with inconsistencies in photos, metadata erasure, and now security irregularities, the incident moved beyond speculation into the realm of potential deception. Meanwhile, the palace, though still silent, had begun its own internal review. Whether officially spurred by these revelations or merely coincidental, palace aides began quietly requesting documentation of titles, baptism records, and ecclesiastical verification for both Archie and Lilibet. Though no formal statement had been issued, insiders say that King Charles was growing increasingly disturbed by the inconsistencies and that he had requested private briefings from independent advisors. As for the whistleblower, he remains in the shadows, choosing anonymity over notoriety. But his testimony, should it ever be made public in court or inquiry, would be a devastating blow to the Sussex narrative. A royal christening, meant to be sacred, joyful, and symbolic, was increasingly looking like a scene from a movie set. And those tasked with protecting it weren't protecting a baby. They were guarding a performance. In the days following the release of the christening photos and the mounting scrutiny from both the press and private circles, the carefully composed image of Meghan Markle began to show cracks. Behind the smiling photographs and serene garden backdrops, insiders report a very different version of events unfolding inside the Montecito estate. One marked by panic, urgent phone calls, and a whirlwind of damage control. Meghan Markle, a woman known for her media precision and image discipline, was allegedly spiraling into crisis mode. According to sources close to the couple's California residence, the first sign of Meghan's distress came just 24 hours after Tyler Perry's quiet warning reached the ears of King Charles. Though the warning itself hadn't yet gone public, whispers had begun to travel through elite social and media circles. Someone had broken the unwritten code of silence. The christening wasn't just being questioned, it was being picked apart by the same media machine Meghan and Harry had fought so hard to escape. Multiple staffers reported that Meghan spent that night awake, pacing. A former aide recalled the atmosphere as electric with tension. Meghan, usually in control, was allegedly frantic, rifling through photos, draft statements, and PR templates. She kept asking the same thing, the aide said. How could Tyler do this to us? Why now? What does he know? Her sense of betrayal was as emotional as it was strategic. Tyler Perry had been her sanctuary, her hero, her trusted ally when the royal fallout first began. She believed he understood her story, her pain, and her need for privacy. That he would be the one to possibly unravel it all was, to her, unthinkable. Reports say she attempted to reach out to Perry immediately, leaving multiple voicemails. He did not answer. Meanwhile, the phones at Archwell Communications were lighting up. Publicists scrambled to prepare contingency plans, monitor trending hashtags, and draft preemptive counter-narratives. Damage control experts from Hollywood and Silicon Valley were reportedly pulled into emergency Zoom calls to assess the situation. According to someone with knowledge of the matter, Meghan was absolutely terrified the story would explode beyond containment. It wasn't just Tyler Perry's name she feared, it was the mounting circumstantial evidence. The photos being questioned, the missing metadata, the anonymous whistleblower from the security team. Meghan had long controlled her image with military-grade discipline. Every interview, every Netflix frame, every Spotify segment was orchestrated. Now, that entire structure was under threat. And worse, the narrative was no longer hers to direct. Insiders say she considered a full media push, a second set of christening photos, a surprise magazine cover, or even a strategically timed interview to clear the air. But those around her warned that anything she said could potentially backfire. The more she tried to explain, the more the public would demand to see the child. The issue wasn't the photo, said one PR consultant. It was the absence of verifiable, real-time presence. The idea of staging another event was discussed and reportedly dismissed. It would appear too forced, too reactive. Instead, Meghan allegedly focused her efforts on silencing the leak. One source claimed that she demanded her legal team draft cease and desist letters for any outlet that attempted to repeat Harry's alleged statement or the whistleblower's security claims. Legal staff were also instructed to tighten all NDAs within Archwell's media circle, reviewing who had access to files, images, or communication related to Lilibet's christening. At the same time, internal rifts began to form. Staffers who once operated in tight harmony found themselves questioning the messaging. One senior aide reportedly resigned quietly after being told they were not permitted to speak to press even off-record. Another said they were no longer comfortable with the narrative being pushed. Outside the gates of Montecito, the media frenzy only grew. Tabloids began calling it Dollgate. Commentators questioned whether Lilibet even existed in the physical sense that had been portrayed. Meghan's past interviews were being re-examined frame by frame. Her baby bump timeline. Her post-delivery media appearances, statements from friends and surrogacy rumors that had previously been dismissed now resurfaced with renewed credibility. Meghan was aware. According to a Netflix insider, she requested access to the raw footage from their documentary series, specifically scenes involving the children. She allegedly wanted to assess whether any clips could be re-edited or repurposed to reinforce the legitimacy of Lilibet's presence. But the footage, the insider claimed, offered little more than what had already been shown: a few shots of a child's hand, a back-of-head silhouette, and generic scenes of a nursery. That wasn't going to be enough. Behind closed doors, Meghan reportedly vented her frustrations at Harry. The couple, usually united, were said to be tense, even distant. Harry, still loyal to his wife but equally embarrassed by the spiraling situation, allegedly urged caution. He was more reluctant to launch a legal battle or address the matter head-on. Meghan disagreed. To her, silence meant surrendering control. In a particularly emotional moment described by someone in their circle, Meghan reportedly said, "They already hate me. If I don't protect this now, they'll destroy everything we've built." And yet, with all the resources at her disposal, publicists, lawyers, strategists, there was one thing she could not control: the growing silence from the royal family. King Charles offered no official response. Neither did Prince William or Catherine. The palace's refusal to acknowledge the christening beyond initial formalities became its own statement. It denied legitimacy without ever issuing a word of condemnation. With the walls closing in, Meghan shifted tactics. Instead of attacking the narrative directly, she began laying groundwork for victim framing. Allies and media were contacted. Friendly podcast hosts and progressive columnists were sent talking points. The story being pitched was that Meghan was under attack once again. Not because of wrongdoing, but because of her race, her refusal to conform, and the royal establishment's desire to control every detail of her family's life. The strategy was clear. If the story couldn't be controlled, it would be reframed. But that approach hit a snag. This time, the backlash wasn't just coming from tabloid readers or royalists. It was emerging from within. Tyler Perry's credibility, the internal whistleblower, and the visual inconsistencies in the christening narrative weren't easily dismissed as racism or institutional bullying. They weren't coming from the press. They were coming from people who had once been allies. And Meghan knew it. She reportedly doubled down on her inner circle, tightening access, reducing public exposure, and making plans to fly overseas to refocus attention. But the damage had already been done. Media coverage grew more skeptical. Late-night comedians began making jokes. Memes proliferated. The illusion was unraveling. Even former supporters began to ask quiet questions. Where was the baby, truly? Why had no one outside of Meghan and Harry ever publicly interacted with her? Why had Lilibet never been seen in motion, in public, even for a second? Meghan's team responded with the only tool they had left: distance. Requests for interviews were declined. Planned appearances were postponed. Communications from Archwell grew more guarded, vague, and sterile. They had entered full-blown containment mode. One PR advisor put it bluntly: "There's nothing left to say. The more they say, the worse it gets. All they can do now is wait and hope the next scandal washes this one away. But not all stories fade. Some settle quietly into the collective memory. Others fester. And this one, centered around a child who may or may not have been physically present at her own christening, shows no signs of going away. Inside the Montecito mansion, Meghan Markle was left to reckon with the moment where image, truth, and narrative collided. And for the first time, she wasn't in control. Inside the stone walls of Clarence's house, the mood was tense but quiet, characteristic of a royal household trained to carry itself with restraint, even when facing potentially explosive revelations. King Charles III had spent the morning in a series of meetings, none of which appeared on his official schedule. No press was allowed. No photos were taken. Only a handful of his closest advisors were present when he was formally briefed on what had been quietly circulating across the Atlantic. The information had come in pieces. First, Tyler Perry's discreet warning that he had attended what he believed was not a genuine christening. Then, a growing body of evidence suggesting no officiant had been present. That had been followed by whispers from within the Sussex camp, security breaches, a possibly staged photo, and a striking lack of any formal documentation. What emerged was not just a case of miscommunication. It was the specter of deception, and it was potentially tied to a child who, by law and tradition, had claimed to a royal title. According to palace insiders, the initial reaction from King Charles was not explosive. There were no raised voices or slammed fists. Instead, there was a slow, deliberate silence as the monarch processed what he had just heard. He requested the report to be read again. Then, he asked for the original photo to be re-examined. Quietly, but unmistakably, he requested that an internal file on Lilibet Diana's christening be opened, reviewed, and updated with any and all new developments. There was no official file to update. That, according to an aide who spoke under strict anonymity, was the first real shock for King Charles. Unlike previous royal christenings, there had been no ecclesiastical letter of confirmation, no signed documentation from a bishop or member of the clergy, no legal proof of ceremony, just a press statement circulated by Harry and Meghan's media team and a stylized photograph shared with selective outlets. The lack of protocol, particularly for an event involving a child who held a place in the line of succession, was unacceptable by royal standards. Christening documents serve not only as religious records, but as historical ones. They are filed, archived, stored as part of the family's official record. Lilibet's absence from this system was a glaring omission. For Charles, who had spent decades preparing for his reign, this was not just a family issue. It was a matter of institutional integrity. He understood the public relations implications. If the story unraveled publicly, the monarchy would face questions about its own complicity. Why had no one asked earlier? Why had titles been granted without proper review? Could the child's legal identity be confirmed at all? The king reportedly convened a private council of his most trusted senior advisors. The meeting was held under the strictest confidentiality. Among those present were his private secretary, a legal advisor, and a representative from the Church of England. The agenda determined what, if anything, the palace officially knew about Lilibet Diana's christening and baptismal status, and whether that knowledge met the requirements for royal recognition. According to a senior source close to the palace, the discussions were serious, cautious, and deeply uncomfortable. The Church of England representative was unable to confirm that any Anglican bishop had been contacted or officiated a ceremony involving Lilibet in the United States. The office of the Archbishop of Canterbury had no record of any baptismal rites performed, witnessed, or even acknowledged. A separate inquiry into California-based Episcopal churches yielded similar results. No diocese had filed paperwork. No priest had stepped forward. No parish had Lilibet on record as a baptized member. This was unprecedented. Every royal child born in the last century had been baptized into the Anglican tradition. George, Charlotte, Louis, even Archie, whose parents had already begun distancing themselves from the monarchy, had a quiet but formally documented christening at Windsor. That Lilibet's sacrament remained unverifiable was not a small matter.